I'm Julianne Good, and this is Psych One-on-One. Welcome. We are here to make psychology more understandable with tips for you, your family, and your friends to have a better life. So tonight, I am joined by Dr. Mikkel Harris. She has been with me on about 2 or 3 other occasions. I'm glad to have her back. We are going to be discussing the mass shooting, and we're also going to be discussing an agency that she is doing volunteer work for, a camp situation for children with a camp situation with children and grieving and loss. So you'll have to excuse me for a minute. We had a little bit of a glip there. So anyways, welcome, Dr. Harris. How are you doing?
I am fantastic. Looking forward to our conversation tonight, and just want to say thank you again. I always enjoy my time across, usually in the station, but I always enjoy my time with you. So thank you for the invitation back.
Yeah, well, thank you. I know that you just got done teaching a class at Chicago School of Professional Psychology in Los Angeles, so I appreciate that you're joining us after the tail end of a class. I know it takes a lot of energy to teach, so.
Yeah, but this is so worth it, and I just enjoy all the opportunities I have to, share knowledge with your audience, so thanks.
Thank you. And I want to start off this program with sending my deepest regrets and deepest hopes for healing down to Orlando after the mass shooting, 49 dead, 53 injured. And it just shocks me again that we're having another mass shooting in this country. I had a couple of other programs about mass shooting, trying to get to the bottom of why this is happening. And this is approximately the 90th mass shooting that we've had in this country over about 40, 50 years. So this is really shocking. And of course, it's happening more. We're having to come to grips with what do we do in the midst of all of this. So, Dr. Harris, what would you like to add to this?
Well, I partner with you in expressing my deepest empathy for the loved ones who've survived the deaths of loved ones, as well as those who were injured. As you mentioned, in addition to the deaths, many people were injured in the Orlando nightclub. And so I want to extend my deepest sympathy and condolences to those families. I cannot imagine, having to face what they've faced in the past 24 hours. So I just want to partner with you on that.
Yes, I did a little bit of reading about the happenings of what happened with the shooter, who is Omar Mateen, and American-born, Afghani parents, and the father did speak out and did do a Facebook posting and about his deepest regrets that his son had ended up doing this. Supposedly, over the last 4 years, the FBI had been investigating him about some comments that he had made to coworkers that they were really upset and concerned about, and they did call and report it. So that he's been kind of under the radar a little bit. He's been kind of flying under, but I guess what ended up fueling this outrage from inside of him and going on to a mass shooting spree was that he saw 2 men kissing each other down in Miami, and it flared him up, and that was it. And obviously, he had planned this out for quite a while because he went in with quite a bit of artillery, and the guards and everything else. So it's just disturbing, and I hope that as a country that we start getting down to what the particulars are that are going into making shooters like this. Because obviously we need to be keeping watch a little bit more. Something that we can do that's in our control. I don't know. I don't have the answers. We're just starting to get to a little bit of the bottom of the research. So,
yeah, I think when you think about mass violence, it's very complicated, and there's so many details that are intertwined to kind of create, the perfect storm, so to speak. And so in this particular situation with Omar Mateen, it sounds like there's some evidence to support some prior investigation, as you alluded to. I believe an ex-wife was interviewed and alluded to some concerns that she had within the marriage with regard to his emotional state and so forth. But again, I think it's very multifaceted. But I think conversations like this are a great starting point because it helps us then be able to kind of rewind a little bit and focus in on what some of those warning signs may be. But it's very challenging. And, as you mentioned, this is one of many deadly events that have happened in America over the past and beyond in the past year and years. And I think it's very challenging to come up with a profile because each one of these situations presents very different sets of circumstances. So I think, again, keeping the conversation alive is so important to kind of drill down to what those common threads may be.
Right. And I'm going to read a little bit of these if I can. There was a professor, Lankin, I believe. I'm sorry, I broke my glasses right before the show. So anyways, there were certain situations that he said were alluded to all of this. Mm-hmm. I think it definitely had said, well, the access to firearms in this country and how many firearms we do have in this country as opposed to other countries, and the gun laws. And I'm not going to make any statement for or against the gun laws. But I really, because this is a show on psychology, again, I stress the mental health component of it. And a lot of times what happens with these mass shooters and what the research that I've seen on this is that they are very isolated. They are very angry. They may have been abused in their houses. They may have been bullied when they were growing up, and they're just, repressed, angry individuals. And this Omar ended up going in and hooking in with ISIS. And it looked like it was getting progressive. And again, ISIS has their own radio station, which I didn't even realize until this shooting. I'm just going, oh, this is unreal that this is happening. And it's right under our noses. So...
yeah, I mean, I think whenever there's any sort of mass crisis or devastation, we obviously want to make sense of what's really unthinkable. And so one of the things that I wanted to point out tonight was this dangerous or potentially dangerous narrative that sometimes gets linked between gun violence and mental illness. So I actually ran across a very interesting study that was recently done in the Annals of Epidemiology. And what it noted is that only about 4% of violence, not just gun violence, is attributable to schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and depression, which are the three most cited mental illnesses noted in conjunction with violence. And I found that fascinating because if someone's going in and engaging in a massacre, we assume that something is off in terms of their mental status. When the reality is, in 96% of the cases, that's not really the case. Now, then it begs the question, what else is going on? What are these other ingredients that are fueling the storm? And again, I don't think we know what those things are. I do think that having access to guns may be part of the problem. Again, I don't want to speak to my philosophy on that, but I think that's one ingredient. There's definitely environmental agents and backgrounds and experiences that people have that lead them to have particular ideologies about certain groups of people. In this case, it was against the LGBT community. But it is very multifaceted. And again, I think that we have to be really careful to tease apart the mental health aspect from gun violence.
Yeah, I agree. It's baffling. It really is. And I'm going to throw this out here too. One of the things that I was reading was they are taking blood donations.
Yes.
For the survivors. And they have a blood bank down there. Now, I guess they have enough blood down there, but they are short on O negative, O positive, and AB blood. I'm O negative, so I called up the American Red Cross, and they said, yes, they are taking donations and sending them to Orlando. If you have those blood types, please contact the American Red Cross this week and go give a donation.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I appreciate you bringing that up because it really, I think, helps shift the conversation from kind of blaming, the circumstances that led to this very devastating event and shifts the community in terms of how it can mobilize to come together to support those who are surviving as well as those who have experienced the loss. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, because I try to pull any positivity into a really negative situation because that helps to shift it. And I know that this is too soon to be, really engaging majorly. I mean, we're going to be going through a period of mourning as a country.
Absolutely.
And the LGBT community also. Mm-hmm. And it's just...
I actually spoke with someone earlier today who resides in Orlando. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions I was asking him was kind of what was the tone and like the tempo or the temper in the city. And the word that he used repeatedly was just very somber. He shared several examples of people in situations where, folks would walk down the street and typically make eye contact or, say some sort of greeting, where today it felt like there was much less contact and engagement between persons and just a very somber experience. So you're right. It's absolutely a community-wide threat that has occurred and a community-wide reaction and response to the event.
And since you deal with a lot of clients and patients with grief and loss issues, mm-hmm. what would you recommend to people who are in the midst of feeling this loss? If they've known somebody who's been in the tragedy, or, it reminds them of something that they had been through previously, or, they're just grieving as being a human being, what would you recommend one of the things that they can do to kind of calm themselves down?
Mm-hmm. So in my experience working with individuals who've experienced any sort of trauma, one of the instinctual things that clients will do is to want to avoid talking about the trauma because it's very loaded, it's very overwhelming and emotional. And so one of my first pieces of advice would be to address the reality of the trauma, and not only that, but address the real safety concerns in the face of a community-wide threat. I mean, let's be honest. It's not, especially we're talking about the LGBT community in Orlando. This is a community who already had existing fears because of the fact that they're part of a distinct part of the community. And so this massacre only reignited legitimate safety fears within the community. So I think to acknowledge those safety concerns is a great starting place. I think from there, it's important to keep those lines of communication open, because as a psychologist, mental health professional, we know that keeping lines of communication open creates a space to share ideas about how to cope. And it's actually in the silence that folks tend to engage in less healthy ways. So actually talking about the crisis can be a space to share healthy coping strategies and forge a dialogue where there otherwise would not be one.
Yeah, so in other words, not isolating and not wallowing on everything. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, creating those dialogues. The other piece of advice that I would offer is for those who have experienced the trauma, as well as those who are supporting someone who has been involved in a community-wide threat, is to stay informed. This is going to sound a little bit counterintuitive, but I think that whenever you've experienced a crisis, especially on this sort of community level, there is a desire to kind of seek out information, whether it be through news media and so forth. And I think it's okay to allow for these moments to check in, for example, with news updates and social media. However, it's important to balance that with taking time to disconnect from that so that it's not re-triggering. But it is important to be informed because, again, sometimes in not connecting with the news itself, that can actually raise anxiety as opposed to lowering it. So we've got to create a balance between staying connected and caring for ourselves.
Yes, that's good advice. Most definitely. I think with anything that happens like this is having that balance and doing good self-care is really essential.
Absolutely. And then the third, kind of along those lines, is to be very observant of oneself as well as those around us, to observe for signs of distress. So as we know, following a crisis, especially on a mass scale, it's not uncommon for folks to feel scared, overwhelmed, shocked, withdrawn, and so forth. Those are very typical reactions. But it is important that those in the community be aware of changes in their emotional state, their attitude, and in their behaviors, so that they know that they may be shifting into an unhealthy coping zone, so to speak, and be able to access the supports that are available to them.
Yes, and there's a lot of grief and loss support groups out there, correct? I mean, it seems like particularly hospitals and mental health clinics will have these support groups, which I think are really beneficial because then you can sit there and compare your experiences along with other people, and then maybe, make some new connections, make some new friends, and then you build that community that is so important for everybody nowadays.
Yeah. No, I think what's interesting when we kind of shift into the grief and loss arena is that if you think about our society as a whole, talking about death and dying and grief and loss is in some ways still taboo. It's not a popular point of discussion. I mean, I do think in, health situations and health organizations like the emergency room and those types of things where they are experiencing death and trauma, those resources are readily available. But I think in the general community, there may actually be a lessening of focus on those types of supports. And then the other thing I'll add is that it's not uncommon for folks who are in need of grief support to receive that kind of in the acute phase. So obviously Orlando happened yesterday. Right now, the community is mobilizing itself and providing supports in the short term. What can happen, of course, each individual person's grief trajectory is different, but what can happen is over time, as days and months pass, those supports are not sustainable. They're not sustained over time. And so you actually have folks who may be having delayed grief reactions who actually aren't supported in the long term following the crisis. And so that's a very important conversation to have so that people are able to access supports across the journey of grief, which is really what it is.
Yeah, because a lot of times when you go through a shocking event like this, a lot of people can numb out. And then they don't know what to do with it. They just hold on to it. And as you said, they've got that delayed grief reaction. And then it can almost manifest more powerfully within that time zone because they've been holding on to it and maybe, acting out or sleeping or overeating or not eating or some change in their eating or sleeping pattern usually is a good sign that something is happening. So what do you typically see when you're going through a delayed grief reaction?
So our minds and bodies are incredibly amazing in terms of mobilizing resources. And so in the face of a trauma like we experienced yesterday, it's not uncommon for folks to kind of, do well in the acute term, the short-term phase, get back to their typical activities and mobilize themselves, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And then with a delayed grief reaction, it's months later, now that, things are kind of our body is kind of resetting itself and kind of getting back into a normal rhythm, that's when we might notice physical reactions like illnesses, physical sensations, headaches, sleep disruption, gastrointestinal, problems, difficulties with interpersonal relationships and emotional uproars, anger. Then the list can go on and on. And so sometimes I think it's important to educate our community about the fact that those reactions may not happen around the time of the event, but later on, when in some ways society is telling you, okay, you should be back to normal, quote unquote, that's when those reactions are showing up. And again, that's where the supports need to be so that people are feeling, supported at that time.
Yes, I definitely agree. So after we take the commercial break, I'd like to talk to you about the Comfort Zone camp that you were, it ties along with what we're talking about here, and that's going more into the positive direction of what do you do with grief and loss.
Sounds good.
Therapy cable is the missing piece in the puzzling question, what is the role of the cyber world in healthcare? Therapy Cable has created a marketplace where healthcare finally meets technology in a consumer-friendly way. We use online technology to bring together various entities of healthcare in one central place. It's easy to access from any internet platform. We provide educational videos on topics like acupressure, medicine, psychotherapy, and yoga. You can confidentially use this information in the privacy of your home. You can stay connected to the provider of your choice or even see your provider in person. Get started today at therapycable.com. And welcome back to Psych One-on-One with Julianne Good and Dr. Mikkel Harris. We are continuing our conversation about grief and loss issues. And Dr. Harris, can you tell us about the work that you've done with Comfort Zone Camp, and what is Comfort Zone Camp?
Okay, thank you. Comfort Zone Camp is a wonderful organization that I can only speak highly of. It is a national children's bereavement program that provides bereavement support services to children ages 7 to 17, as well as some young adult and family-specific programs throughout the year in multiple parts of the country. And the whole mission of Comfort Zone is really three-pronged. On one hand, it's to help educate the community about grief and loss and the impact of grief and loss, not only individually, but at a community level. Secondly, it's there to help children and families realize that they are not alone, particularly in light of grief. It's not uncommon for people to feel isolated. So it's a way for these children and families to come together and realize that they have a shared experience. And then thirdly, it's an opportunity for the families who've experienced camp to go back out in their communities and be community ambassadors to help, again, educate the community, increase awareness around grief and loss, and really help people understand the trajectory involved with grief, which is not an isolated experience.
And how long have you been doing the work?
I have been involved with Comfort Zone since 2010. It's kind of a funny story. I trained at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, and throughout the course of my internship and fellowship training, experienced the deaths of several patients. And so one of the referrals that one of our clinic social workers provided was Comfort Zone. And so I was referring clients to Comfort Zone and thought, I probably need to go to the camp and experience it myself so I can give firsthand information about what the camp offers, and decided that it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, and have continued to volunteer with their programs all throughout the country for the past 6 years. That's wonderful. And that is volunteer, correct? It is a volunteer experience. Yeah. Comfort Zone is, again, a national organization with its headquarters in Virginia, but the camps that they offer, which are weekend-long camps, Friday through Sunday, are located in California, Virginia, Massachusetts, and also New Jersey. And in addition to that, Comfort Zone has recently, within the past few years, started partnering with other organizations in the country to offer death-specific camps. For example, individuals who've lost someone by suicide. There's a suicide-specific camp. There's a homicide-specific camp. In a couple weeks, I'll be volunteering at through the National Firefighters Association. So individuals who've lost a loved one as a result of firefighter activity. And so there are many other iterations of this. But yeah, Comfort Zone is nationwide and has done a great job partnering to really address grief and loss from a holistic perspective.
So how do children and their families get referred to Comfort Zone?
I apologize. There's a bit of a...
Okay, so we're having we're waiting for Dr. Harris to get back on here. So, so how are you doing through all of this? That's the big question, right? Yeah. It's been an interesting time for, losing things and regaining a sense of stability, I think, for all of us. It's been a little difficult, and I hope you're taking good care of yourself. I hope you're reaching out to friends and family members, and, and again, I agree that this is a good time to just, count your blessings where you can, definitely, because, life is short and a lot of things in life are temporary, so we just have to kind of hang in there, right? Yeah, so we're just kind of hoping that Dr. Harris comes back on here and continue this wonderful conversation that we're having. So... what else can we talk about here? So this is a one-way conversation, right? Oh. What do we do when we go through a situation like this? I guess that's the big question, because I did have a prior program on about maybe about a year or two ago about mass shootings and what can we do when something like this happens. And when I was reading the CNN feed, it was like a lot of the people in the club, and there were about 300 people in the club, they thought that the gunfire was just part of the music because it was in rhythm with the song. So... okay.
Yeah, Julianne. So, what I'm curious about in this situation, and we're going to work on trying to get her back on the line. But when this happens for the surviving family of these victims, what is the first step in speaking with a psychologist on coping with such a tragic loss? What's step number one?
I would think that the first step that you need to take, hopefully, is if this is a family member that this has happened to, that you get automatic support from your loved ones, because you may be in such a state of shock that you need to have somebody be your spokesperson. You need to have somebody call up the therapist and say, hey, my loved one just went through a tragic death of their son or daughter or husband or wife, and they need to come in and talk to you about this, because it's, it's a process of having to get a little bit of stabilization underneath you while you're going through this. And just, if it gets to be like overwhelming, go to the emergency room and let them know, and maybe have them give you like an anxiolytic or something to just kind of balance you out and calm you out until you can go on to the next step. So it depends on how deep the grief, the shock, and the loss are.
So basically, try to work with family and turn to family to get through such a horrific loss.
Yes, family and friends are definitely the first step. And again, there's different stages of going through a grief and loss situation like this. It doesn't affect everybody in the same manner. So some people might be screaming, some people might shell up, some people just might, hole up in their bedrooms and sleep for days, or as long as they possibly can. So it's up to the loved one to take care of that person.
Those that are close to you and understand you and those types of things. Yeah. So I think what we should do right now in an effort to get the doctor back on the line is go to a commercial.
Yes.
And then we will see if we can maybe, if she's having internet issues, maybe we can get her to call in the 800 number instead.
That would be terrific. Thank you.
Okay.
The Chicago School of Professional Psychology offers numerous psychology, behavioral, and health-related science graduate degrees at 3 campuses: Los Angeles, California, including branches in Westwood and Irvine, Chicago, Illinois, and Washington, D.C., and online. The Chicago School prepares students to meet the ever-changing mental health needs of society through classroom experience and real-world training. The Chicago School Counseling Centers in Irvine and Westwood provide caring, confidential, and affordable psychological services to individuals and their families. For more information, visit thechicagoschool.edu.
Welcome back to Psych One-on-One with Julianne Good and Dr. Mikkel Harris. And we had to switch over to phone conversation here because the Skype connection was just not wanting to work for us. And I'm sorry, because it would have been nice to see you again, but we got to see you for part of the show. So
yes, thank you.
Yes. So where did we leave off with talking about Comfort Zone Camp?
I think you were asking me about my involvement with Comfort Zone, as well as, I believe, how to get involved within the organization, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah. So, again, Comfort Zone is a free camp for children ages 7 to 17, and camps are offered all throughout the year across the country. Again, the main mission is to provide grieving children with a voice and a place to, as Comfort Zone likes to say, heal, grow, and grieve in order to lead more fulfilling lives. So Comfort Zone offers trainings all throughout the year, throughout the country, for volunteers to serve as big buddies. For each camp, there are roughly 65 to 70 children per camp weekend. And so each one of those children is assigned what's known as a big buddy, someone who may or may not have experienced loss, but someone who can be their point person throughout the 3-day weekend experience. And then in addition to that, the role that I've typically played is as a healing circle facilitator. So while Comfort Zone is not a therapeutic camp wholly, it does offer opportunities for kids to come together as a group in small healing circles, share their stories, and know that they can be supported by other people who've gone through similar things, as well as to learn coping strategies moving forward. So it's an incredible organization that I feel so blessed to be able to be a part of.
It sounds like they pack a lot in within a weekend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the camp weekends, so as you may know, as your audience may know, grief is not kind of a universal experience, nor is it one where you're always down or always up for the most part. And so the weekend starts off with an opportunity for someone who's a little bit older, a little bit further down the grief journey to share their story. And then there's also kind of action-packed activities for the kids, like ropes courses and ways to keep them energized, and then also these moments to, express their stories and kind of experience the emotion surrounding grief. And the camp mindset is that it really helps pattern what's typical of the grief journey, which is filled with lots of ups and downs. So it's designed to help kiddos navigate those ups and downs collectively.
Now, because they are children, are they a little more receptive and have more tenacity than working with adults going through grief and loss issues?
I think it really depends on the individual child. Of course, in general, I think that kids are more resilient, partly because they've experienced less years of living, but at the same time, children who've experienced loss have had devastating events some adults have not experienced. So I think it really depends on the child. I can say in my experiences as a healing circle leader, I have seen kids literally come in on Friday evening or Friday afternoon and be completely closed off, number one, to the experience of being at camp, B, just mortified at the thought of sharing their story. And by Sunday afternoon, they have blossomed and shared aspects of their story, allowed themselves to be vulnerable, and receive support from other people. So it's incredible. We kind of collectively refer to it as the camp bubble, and it really is amazing to see these kids come in and leave as very different individuals within a matter of 48 hours.
Yeah, I love transformational experiences like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just wonderful to see. And it brings back hope, because when you're doing grieving and loss situations, there's part of people that feel helpless. Mm-hmm. It's that natural tugging down of, what do I do with this? Where do I go? Why is this happening to me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and throughout the weekend, there's not a set curriculum, so to speak. There are some things. Obviously, we want the kids to have a space to express their stories, be able to identify kind of the range of emotions that are common and acceptable when grieving, and also to develop some coping tools to be able to take home. But it's quite tremendous, the conversations that we end up in. Some around issues of forgiveness, some, questioning why their loved one died, especially if it was a sudden and traumatic death, and the list could go on and on. But I think the unifying thread, kind of regardless of the type of loss, is the fact that there is a, collective mourning and understanding about the fundamental impact of grief, and that it's life altering. And all the kids walk away knowing that they are not alone. which is incredible every single time. And I kind of go into camp thinking, okay, is this camp going to feel qualitatively different than the first? And every single time, and I volunteered at over 20 camps in the past, 6 years, and every single time feels not only like the first time, but even more extraordinary than the one before. It's truly life-changing.
That's amazing. So how often do they run the weekend camps on average?
Yeah, so California, there have been some recent shifts in the number of camps this year, but historically 4 camps per year. And now I think they're doing 2 camps per year in California. In Virginia, I believe that they are still running, I want to say 3 to 4 camps per year. So there's several opportunities for kids to experience the camp and have a chance to connect with other children like themselves.
And then who do they have on staff? What type of people do they hire for this? I know counselors and therapists, and I shouldn't say hire, but I know ask for volunteers. Yes,
that's what I was going to say. Comfort Zone blows my mind when I actually think about who's on staff, because the majority of the activities that keep the camp going and growing are volunteers. So the types of volunteer pool includes professionals from all walks of life. Of course, there's a training that every volunteer goes through to help them understand what grief is, help them understand their role throughout the weekend, and kind of expose them to some of the things that they may hear and see throughout the weekend. But volunteers come from all walks of life, all professional backgrounds. Now, the healing circles, because that is functioning in somewhat of a therapeutic role, are trained mental health professionals, whether we be licensed psychologists or clinical social workers or counselors in some sort, who have training to be able to, lead and facilitate a group of the size that they are, which is roughly anywhere from 8 to 10 kiddos per healing circle, plus their big buddies. So it's a tremendous responsibility. So those folks do have specific clinical expertise in grief and loss.
And it's nice that they keep the groups that small.
Yes. And they're separated by age. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the typical age of the children?
So the camp's available for kids 7 to 17. In terms of the groups that I've had, I've worked with the littlest, groups of the 7-year-olds all the way up to the teenagers. So on a weekend, you'll have the full range, 7 to 17. And the healing circles are divided by age with a healing circle facilitator and sometimes a co-facilitator as well as the big buddies.
So it sounds like they're pretty busy, right? I mean, and it sounds like they've got enough staff to client ratio, which is really good.
It is. It blows my mind every single time how these volunteers from all parts of the state mobilize for a weekend experience and, come in on Friday never having interacted necessarily. And then Friday or by Sunday, there is such a community feel in that bubble that honestly lingers in the days, weeks, sometimes months to follow. Comfort Zone does a wonderful job keeping its community connected. And they also do things like fundraising events and fun runs and so forth, so that people are staying connected to the camp, as well as then, again, going out in their community and serving as ambassadors to educate the community about death, dying, grief, and loss.
Yeah, it sounds wonderful, where they learn something, they let go of some of their heaviness, and they go out and they pass it forward. And that's wonderful. That's one of the best ways to not get restuck in an old pattern, is going, okay, well, I got through at least a little bit of this, and now the next time that I come across somebody that has gone through maybe something like I've gone through, I can sit there and support that person, because that is a really tough thing for most people to be able to handle. Most people, when, they go through, they have somebody say, I've had somebody pass away, or maybe my dog, or You know, I mean, something that some person or animal or whatever that they really love. It's that process, you know, and the person who's receiving that message has a really difficult time, a lot of times, of saying, what do I say now? A lot of people say, I'm sorry, because that's kind of a natural reaction. I'm sorry for your loss or whatever. Some people just get tongue-tied and twisted. So that's a really good skill to have down, is to learn to be supportive of a person when they've had a major loss.
Yeah, and I think one of the great things, and again, Comfort Zone is definitely a camp that I've been engaged in, but there are other grief support networks and camps that are similar to Comfort Zone. But one of the great things that I think occurs in the weekend is helping kiddos, number one, recognize their voice and their power as a survivor of someone who's died, and helping them have the language so that when they do return to their communities, they can help people understand how to support them. So, for example, you know, one of the best ways to support someone who's grieving is simply listening and really not giving a lot of direction with regard to, you know, how to emotionally deal with the death. And it's great to be able to arm kids with that over the weekend, so that when they go home, they can say, hey, when I come and I'm crying or I'm having a tough day, one of the best things you can do with me is just to sit with me and not necessarily have an answer to solve the problem, because there are no answers and there is no right thing that's going to bring their loved one back.
Right.
So I love that aspect of the camp, is that it really helps empower kids to have a voice and to be able to exercise their voice when they return home.
Yeah, and I love that. Please just sit with me. Just be with me. A lot of the clients that I work with who have grief and loss issues, and sometimes it takes them years to process it. You know, I tell them, when they're sifting through all this, just don't go into your room and close the door and that's it. I want you to reach out and just even sit with somebody. And you don't need to say anything. They don't need to say anything either sometimes. Just to be there. You know?
And I think this ties in beautifully with the experience in Orlando.
Yes.
I can imagine, you know, based upon my conversation with my friend earlier, how the community who was not directly impacted by the experience, but indirectly impacted, how they are feeling in terms of how to support their community members. And I think this is a great conversation to have, and that is keeping the dialogue open and knowing that by providing yourself, your person, as a support without having the quote-unquote right things to say, that's perfectly acceptable support. And that will go a long way in helping that person who has experienced the death of a loved one to be able to talk about it freely and openly without, you know, any sort of judgment or stigma associated with the conversation.
Yeah, and just being there and not getting up and leaving because you're uncomfortable as to, I don't have the answer to this. I don't know what to do with this. It's because part of it is, you know, getting up and being uncomfortable with that. I mean, that's fine. A lot of us are. But just being able to maybe sit there and say, you know, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I'm uncomfortable right now. And I need to do something, but touch base with me, you know, instead of just getting up and leaving, because that is kind of geared in our brain that that's a form of abandonment. And that's...
Well, yeah, and I think what's interesting, as I was kind of panning through, you know, some of the social media sites today and looking at some of the news clips about what's going on in Orlando, one of the things I saw were several community vigils. And in my mind, I thought the reason that these vigils are so powerful, number one, in mobilizing the community, but also it gives a space to simply be. You know, vigils are not designed to kind of tell people how to grieve. It's simply an honoring and acknowledgement via a moment of silence or in prayer in some communities, or simply presence that lets those who have survived know we're here with you. We don't have all the answers, but we definitely are here to surround you and support you through your grief. So it's such a powerful statement to survivors.
It is. And just to be able to cry together can be healing. Because a lot of people have difficulty crying after a situation like this. So that's powerful.
It is. And I think in this case, in particular, number one, we have the LGBT community, which is historically, kind of been marginalized. And then we also have divides regarding, the fact that the shooter, ascribed to certain ideologies, and that's creating division. And so I think that the extent to which Orlando and all of the surrounding communities can really mobilize on common threads will be so powerful and will go a long way in keeping those communities connected as opposed to fractured in the days, months to come.
Yes, I agree. And hopefully something really positive can be built off of this. And we do keep the conversation going about what do we do in a situation like this. Yeah.
I think right now our society, if you kind of, I think the day before there was a young woman. I believe her last name was Grimes. I apologize if that's incorrect. But
You're right.
Was murdered. She was murdered. So then right on the heels of that is this Orlando experience. And before all of that were several other, mass shootings, mass, events going on. That can create individual and community paralysis where we just don't know what to do in response. And so I think we've also got to take into account the cumulative, nature of all of these things that have been going on in America, but challenge ourselves to kind of reach beyond that and keep that dialogue alive. It's so important to do that.
Yes, and learn to reinstill a sense of safety. Because situations like this have a tendency to make people a little paranoid afterwards about going into public spaces where there are going to be a lot of people. And, then all of a sudden you have all these fears cropping up, which is kind of natural, I think.
It is. It is. I mean, we definitely want to put ourselves in situations where we are protecting, ourselves. And I think that in the face of anything traumatic, our natural tendency is to kind of flee away from that to protect. But at the same time, I think part of keeping the conversation alive is saying, okay, let's think about this isolated event. Even though it does not feel isolative, let's look at all of the evidence to show that our communities are safe. What are the resources that we know are available so that one incident does not force us to go into hiding?
Right.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it's tempting to do that, especially in today's society where there's just so much going on.
Yeah, or it'll, the tendency is to force us to get out of profiling people too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
And again, yes, I think that the fact that we have an awesome responsibility to not allow schemas, we know as mental health professionals that we all have these kind of mindsets and ways of viewing the world. And sometimes social events can happen that reinforce those mindsets. Some are factual and accurate, and some are not helpful to the community. And so, again, people coming out of hiding, having conversations, interacting with members of our community who look different than us, who sound different than us is important so that we can realize that at the end of the day, we're all part of this human experience. And we all know what it is like to suffer, mourn, grieve, experience loss, and so forth.
Exactly. Thank you. And just one more shout out for the Comfort Zone Camp. And they've got a website under comfortzonecamp.com, I take it? Okay, wonderful.
Actually, it's comfortzonecamp.org.
Okay.
O-R-G.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, and thank you so much, Dr. Harris. I really appreciate having you on and hope to have you on a future podcast.
Thank you so much. I, again, enjoy all of our time together, and thank you for allowing me to do that plug to Comfort Zone. It's, again, something I could speak hours about and something that has absolutely impacted my own life professionally and personally. So I appreciate you allowing me to share a little bit about the organization.
Well, thank you for sharing, and thank you for volunteering. You do awesome work.
I'm just blessed to be able to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much to our listening audience for Psych One-on-One. I really appreciate all of the support that you have given me and all the downloads, and really, really appreciate that. Hopefully the people who started with me 3 years ago just kept on continuing. I don't know, but I'm just hoping that. So, yeah, we are coming to the close of We Play Radio at the end of the month. So please tune back into Psych One-on-One. We will be on We Play Radio for a while. We will be also on the iTunes podcast. So hopefully I'm going to find a new home soon and keep on going, because I love doing this. I love giving out the information to you, and I hope this has been really, really helpful. So I'm going to have one last podcast at the end of the month to just kind of wrap everything up. And I hope that you join me on the last Monday of June. So thank you very much. And I hope you take care of yourself and take care of each other. Bye now.